I returned from a business trip, went into our office to say hello to my colleagues. But instead of the usual smiles, there was silence. My accountant came up to me and whispered, "Brian, there is no money. Angela withdrew everything, and your business is sold." I stood in the hallway and the fragments of my life were flying around. My name is Brian. I am 38 years old. Just 6 months ago, I considered myself a happy man, a beautiful wife, Angela, a joint business that I had been building for 10 years, a luxurious house in the suburbs, expensive cars. I thought I had everything, but it turned out that the most valuable thing is not money. It is faith in the person who sleeps next to you, and it was this faith that my wife trampled on like a dirty rag. I grew up in an ordinary family. My parents were teachers. We never had a lot of money, but we had love and mutual respect. Since childhood, I dreamed of making a name for myself, of earning so much that I would never have to count a penny. So after college, I immediately plunged into business. Together with a friend, I created a small company for developing software for small businesses. The first years were terribly difficult. We worked nights, lived on fast food, barely made ends meet. But then the first clients appeared, then the second, the third, and everything started to turn around. I met Angela while I was still in college. She was bright, kind, and always supported me. We got married when I was 28, and she was the person who said, "You can do it, Brian. I believe in you." I worked to give her the best. She wanted a house. We bought a house. She dreamed of a vacation in the Maldives. We flew to the Maldives. She wanted a car. I bought her a BMW. I thought it was love, that we were together, that we were a team. I let her be a part of the business. She helped with the documents, had access to the accounts. Because who else could I trust if not my wife? I was sure she was my support, but in reality, she was the one holding the knife and waiting for the moment to stick it in my back. That morning I was flying home from a business trip. The $1.2 million contract was our biggest success. I was happy. I imagined telling Angela, "We did it. We are now truly secure." I had no idea that while I was signing the contract, she had already signed the documents that would ruin my life. I didn't know that while I was flying home, she was already packing her bags, but not for us, but for herself and her lover. And that the next morning I would wake up in a reality where there would be no more company, no more money, and no more wife. I didn't know yet that I would lose everything, but they didn't know that I would come back stronger. I stepped off the plane in high spirits. The $1.2 million contract was in my pocket. This was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. I imagined Angela and I popping champagne, celebrating our success. I dreamed of finally starting to build that bigger house she had been talking about for so long. We would finally have a baby because now we would be financially able to afford anything. I was driving to the office to surprise my team. I imagined how excited they would be, how we would plan the expansion together. I entered the building, went up to our floor. Strangely, the atmosphere was different, tense. The secretary, usually smiling, this time just nodded grimly. I walked over to the office of my CFO, Paul. He had been my friend since we started this company. I walked in with a smile. "Paul, we did it," I said, waving the contract. But he didn't smile. His face was gray. He was silent. I sat down opposite him and repeated, "What happened?" Paul slowly pulled some papers out of a drawer and placed them in front of me. "Brian, Angela took it all out. What are you carrying? All the accounts are empty. She took out almost $500,000. That's impossible." "Maybe. She had access. She sold your share of the company using forged documents. It's already legal." My ears rang. I couldn't believe it. I took those documents. It was terrifying. Her signature, her initials, her power of attorney. It all felt like I had let it happen. I was shaking. And she disappeared, Brian. We can't reach her. How did this happen? Why didn't you tell me? I called you. She said you knew and not to bother you. She said you sold your share because you wanted to get away from it all. I clutched my head. It was like a movie where the main character is trapped, but it was real. My wife had robbed me. My wife had sold my business. My wife had cheated on me. I jumped up and dialed her number. The caller was out of range. Again and again. The same. I texted, "What have you done?" But I didn't get a response. I left the office in a fog. It seemed like everyone around me was looking at me like I was a failure. I got in the car, but I couldn't drive. My hands were shaking. I opened Instagram, and there I saw her, Angela, on the beach, with a glass of champagne. Caption, "New life, new opportunities." In the photo next to her was him, Richard, my former partner, whom I had kicked out of the company 6 months ago for fraud. I recognized the scumbag immediately. He was smiling, putting his arm around her waist. And then I understood everything. This was a plan. She had been playing the role of the perfect wife all this time, to strike when I was most defenseless. And she did it. That night, I didn't sleep. I was sitting on the floor of our house, among expensive furniture that no longer mattered. I looked at the walls I had painted when we first moved here. I remembered how she and I had laughed while choosing the tiles for the kitchen. It was all poison now. I felt like I was already dead, that I would never get up again. But then I remembered her face in that photo, her smile, his hand on her waist, and something inside me ignited. I would be back, and I would make them regret not finishing me off then. I woke up to the sound of the doorbell. It was still dark. My head was pounding. I hadn't slept much. I opened the door and saw 2 men in business suits. "Brian Miller?" "Yes. We represent a bank. You're behind on your mortgage payments." "What?" "If you don't pay $120,000 within 2 weeks, we'll have to start eviction proceedings." I stood in the hallway, barefoot, my face swollen. It felt like a dream, but it was real. I closed the door, sat down on the floor, and stared at the wall. Over the next few days, everything began to fall apart like a house of cards. Every morning, my creditors called me. My bank cards were blocked. I was summoned to the tax office. Angela had left huge debts on behalf of the company, and now I was responsible for everything. The Lord confirmed the worst. She had a power of attorney, and formally everything was legal. If you don't prove fraud, it will remain on you. But it's a long case, and even then the money may not come back, he said. I was left alone in a huge house that no longer seemed cozy. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost. Where Angela and I used to laugh, now there was silence. I opened the closets. They were empty. She even took her jewelry. In the bedroom, on the bedside table, there was only her note with 2 words. "This is a business." It broke me. I tried to work. I came to the office, but my place was no longer there. Some intern had taken my desk. I wasn't even allowed into the conference room. I was a nobody. Those who had called me boss a week ago were now avoiding my gaze. The secretary silently escorted me to the exit. I remembered Angela telling me once, "Brian, never stop or you'll be eaten." Now she was the one who had eaten me. There was no money. The house was being taken away. I had to sell my car to pay the lawyers, but even that wasn't enough. I rented a small room on the outskirts of town. It smelled of mold, the bed creaked, the walls were covered in stains. I sat in this room, looking at my phone, hoping that she would write, say it was a joke, that she would come back. But she didn't. I went on social media, new photos. She's on a yacht. She's at a restaurant with her lover. She laughs. And I was eating instant noodles and counting dollars to pay rent. The worst was with my friends. I wrote to Paul, the CFO. I need help. He didn't answer. I called my former startup partner. I'm having trouble. Brian, I sympathize, but now is not the time. Maybe you want to start something together? I can't take risks. Sorry. I became a leper. People who used to be proud and know me were now afraid that I would ask for money. I tried to find a job. I went to an interview at an IT company, thinking that they would rip me off with my hands. HR looked at my resume and said, "You were a manager, a businessman. Why do you need a regular position? I just want to start over. Sorry, we're looking for someone who will be stable, not temporary with us." I've been rejected everywhere. One night, I couldn't stand it and wrote to Angela, "Why are you like this with me?" She replied an hour later, "You're a businessman, Brian. This is just business. Take it as a defeat." I clutched the phone, wanted to throw it at the wall. But then I understood. She thought this was the end, that she had won. But I decided this wasn't the end. This was just the beginning. That night I swore to myself, I'll get up, I'll get it back, and I'll destroy her the way she destroyed me. I woke up to the sound of dripping water dripping from the ceiling of my rented room. The old pipes were leaking. The stain on the ceiling was spreading like rust, just as my pain inside was spreading. I sat up in bed, holding my phone. I wanted to just text her again. "Come back. Why did you do this?" But I didn't. I opened her profile on social media. A new photo, Angela in a white swimsuit on a yacht. Richard next to her. Caption, "Love and success. Hearts." In the comments, her friends wrote, "How happy you are, beautiful. Life is a success." I almost broke my phone. Happiness? This is happiness for my money. I knew this yacht was a minimum $5,000 per day rental. My money. They were having fun while I counted dollars to buy a pack of pasta. I went outside to get some fresh air. It was drizzling outside. I went into a small cafe, ordered the cheapest coffee. I sat in the corner so no one would see me. I saw people I knew. They were walking by, but I was hiding. I was no longer the successful Brian. I was a shadow. Nobody wanted to know me. That same evening, I went to the old warehouse where one of my friends worked, Tony. He was one of those guys who never asked too much, but could always find a job. I went up to him. "Can I work for you?" He looked at me in surprise. "You? Brian? A businessman? Tony, I need to start somewhere." "Well, I can take a job as a loader. We pay a little, but..." I agree. The next morning, I was already dragging boxes, unloading trucks. My hands were buzzing. My back was aching. A man who was used to solving business problems, was now working with my hands for pennies. I stood in the dirt, in the dust, and I was angry. At myself. At her. At the whole world. But it was there, in the warehouse, that I first thought about something bigger. While I was loading boxes, I listened to the workers' conversations. "Did you hear Richard blew a deal?" "What deal?" "A big one. His company lost a contract. Apparently the investors weren't happy. And I heard he had big loans." I froze. This was my chance. If he weakens, I can strike. I didn't know how yet, but that moment was my first step. I realized that their perfect world wasn't that strong either, and I decided that I would find a way to hurt them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I had no plan. I had no money. But I realized the main thing. They weren't as invincible as they seemed. I lay on my old bed, looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "I'll be back, and I'll destroy you the way you destroyed me." The next morning I arrived at the warehouse as usual. My hands were all calloused. My back ached as if I had been beaten all night. But something had already changed inside me. I was no longer just a broken man who had been thrown to the sidelines of life. I had become a predator biding my time. During my lunch break, I took out my phone and opened Angela's page again. New photos. The pool, expensive cocktails, designer clothes. Richard next to her, his smug smile. He held the keys to his new car. The caption, "Living to the fullest. Nothing superfluous." I gritted my teeth. This was my money. My years of work. my trust, and I had already decided I would pay it all back with interest. After the shift, I heard the guys talking about Richard again. He's been ripping money out of the company for 3 months now. They say investors are unhappy. Some kind of checks have already begun. But he'll somehow get out of it. He always does. It was a crack. I knew Richard from the time we worked together. He was cunning but greedy. And this greed could have become his weakness. I decided to find out more. In the evening, I called my old friend John. He worked in the financial sector and had connections. We hadn't talked since my fall, but I took a chance. John, hi. This is Brian. Oh, Brian. Hi, long time no see. Listen, I need to find out something about Richard. Is he clean? Richard? Oh, don't you know? He's in trouble. Investors suspect he's withdrawing funds. Can you get some documents? It's risky. I'll pay as soon as I get back on my feet. Okay, I'll get something. That call gave me my first hope. I knew Richard was playing with fire, and I'd just wait until he burned himself. The next morning I came back to the warehouse. My hands hurt even more, but I could already feel it. It was temporary. This was just a way to get revenge. That day I learned something else interesting. One of the drivers of the warehouse worked for a company that cooperated with Richard. I accidentally picked up the conversation. Listen, do you know Richard personally? Oh, yes. A difficult guy. He's constantly withholding money. Withholding? Yes. He hasn't paid us for 2 months. The guys are unhappy. I just nodded, but everything inside me was burning. Another crack. Another nail in their perfect fairy tale. That evening, John sent me some documents. I opened the files. They were Richard's financial statements. There were many suspicious transactions. Money was being transferred to some shell companies. The amounts did not add up. This was proof. Not final yet, but something. I looked at these documents and smiled. I could see their world starting to shake. A little more, and I would strike, so that they would not rise again. That night, I fell asleep more peacefully than I had in the last month. I knew what I would do. I knew that I had started a war, and I knew that I would win. I woke up at 5 a.m. before my alarm went off. This time, it wasn't out of anxiety or desperation. I woke up with a sense of foreboding. I knew a new phase was beginning. I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, sat down at the old desk in my room, and pulled out the financial documents John had given me. I went over each number again. I saw Richard withdrawing money from the firm into shell accounts, disguising it as consulting, equipment purchases, legal services. The scheme was obvious to anyone who knew how it worked, and I knew. I had once defended my own business against the likes of Richard. Now I was going to use my knowledge against him. But simply knowing about the fraud wasn't enough. These facts needed to be known to those who could destroy him. And I knew who they were. Investors. I remembered that Richard had invested a lot of capital in the company a few years ago. I even knew the name of the main investor, Thomas Grant. He was a tough businessman who did not tolerate fraud. If he found out that Richard was stealing his money, it would be the end. I opened LinkedIn, found Thomas's profile. I wrote him a message. Mr. Grant, I am a former business partner of Richard. I have information that your investments are being used for other purposes. I can provide evidence. My name is Brian Miller. Please contact me. I did not expect a quick response. People like Thomas do not scatter attention. But I took the first step. The next day I was back at the warehouse, hauling boxes. But in my head, I wasn't there at all. I saw Richard smiling in another photo on social media, and in my mind he was already standing in court, sweating and confused. I imagined Angela packing her bags, only this time not for a 5-star hotel, but for a cheap motel, and that gave me strength. In the evening, I checked my messenger again. Nothing. No answer from Thomas. No news about Richard. But I knew that these things don't happen overnight. The main thing was to wait. I sat on the bed and thought, Richard, you don't know it yet, but your days are numbered. The next morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone rang. Message. Good afternoon. This is Thomas Grant. I want to see your evidence. I'm expecting a call today at 2 p.m. I almost jumped. This was a breakthrough. I was getting closer to my goal. At exactly 2 p.m. I dialed him. The voice was cold, confident. Go ahead. I laid it all out. The shell companies, the fake transactions, the late payments. I handed him the documents I received from John. There was silence. And then Thomas said, if this is confirmed, Richard will be destroyed. It will be confirmed, I replied. Thanks for the information. We'll be in touch. I hung up the phone and took a deep breath. I made my first move, and I knew this was just the beginning. Richard and Angela are still smiling in the photo, but that smile will soon disappear. The next morning I arrived at the warehouse, but this time something had changed in me. My hand still ached, my back ached, but my head felt light. I knew I had taken the first step. I was no longer the one who had been destroyed. I had become the one who was pushing. I was working, but I kept glancing at my phone. I was waiting for news. I knew things wouldn't turn around that quickly, but impatience was eating at me. I imagined Thomas Grant already calling Richard for a conversation. How he was sweating, nervous, trying to get out of it. How Angela was sitting at home, unsuspecting, leafing through handbag catalogs, thinking that their carefree life would last forever. But I could already feel their sand starting to crumble. Towards lunchtime, I received a message from John, the friend who had given me the financial documents. Brian, something is happening. Investors came to Richard's office today. Everyone is tense. Something serious. I could barely hold back a smile. This was what I had been waiting for. After work, I immediately called John. What do you know? Thomas was there himself. He gathered everyone. He demanded reports. He said that if he found anything, he would fire Richard immediately. And what? Panic, Brian. They were running around, looking for papers, making excuses. They said Richard had burst into the office red-faced, shouting at everyone. I smiled. I saw it in my mind. Richard, always so self-assured, now hysterical, and the investors were cold and ruthless. This was just the beginning. He didn't know yet that I had planted the bomb for him. That evening I opened Angela's page again. There were no more photos. The last post was yesterday, in the pool with a cocktail. And today, silence. I knew what that meant. Something had gone wrong. Their paradise was starting to crack. I opened Richard's page, the same thing. No funny photos, no new posts. He usually bragged about every new car, every dinner at an expensive restaurant. And now, as if he had been erased, I smiled for the second time that day. That was my small victory. The next day I was back working in the warehouse. While I was carrying boxes, I received a new message from John. Richard was yelling again today. They say Thomas wants to do an audit. If they find anything, it will be the end. I exhaled. I knew what they would find, because I had already shown them where to look. That evening I went to the store near my house. I bought the cheapest bottle of beer, sat down in my cramped room, opened my laptop, and just watched. I knew this was just the beginning, but I could already see their perfect world starting to crumble, and the best was yet to come. On the third day after my call to Thomas Grant, I felt the situation become even more tense. The morning began as usual, unloading boxes, but my mind was far from the warehouse. John wrote to me again. Richard is calling a meeting. They say he's hired lawyers to cover his tracks. He's hearing something. Panic is building. I couldn't help but smile. He was fidgeting, which meant my shot had hit the mark. That same day after work, I contacted John again. What exactly did you hear? He's making everyone shut up, threatening to fire them. He's asked the IT guys to delete some files. What, deleted? No. A guy I trust copied everything. He has backup copies of Richard's payments and correspondence with the shell companies. Can you get this for me? It's risky. I'll pay John. I'll get back into business. And I won't forget who helped me. Okay, but it won't be easy. I hung up. That was more than I expected. Financial reports are one thing, but the correspondence where Richard himself negotiates kickbacks was a sentence. The next morning I got a short message from John. It's all there, on a flash drive. We need to meet in person. I pretended to be sick, took a day off in the warehouse, and drove across town. We met in a coffee shop. John was tense. He handed me the flash drive in a discreet envelope. If Richard finds out, he won't. And even if he does, it'll be too late. I went back to my room, turned on my laptop, and opened the files. I was amazed. It wasn't just evidence. It was a complete package for a lawsuit. Contracts with fictitious companies. Richard's signatures. His emails where he demanded a kickback of $50,000. Correspondence with Angela where she wrote, "Darling, the main thing is that this idiot meeting me doesn't get up again. We need this money." I stopped. I was overcome with rage. But at the same time, it was my greatest pleasure. She thought I was destroyed, and I held her verdict in my hands. I wrote to Thomas. "There is more information. This is serious. We need a personal meeting." The answer came an hour later. "I'll be waiting for you tomorrow at 9 a.m. in my office." I leaned back on the bed. I knew it would be fatal for Richard and for Angela. Their paradise would turn into hell. And that was just the beginning. I woke up before dawn. This time I felt neither pain nor fatigue. There was only one thing, a premonition of justice, which was finally about to come. At 8:30, I was already near Thomas Grant's office. A huge business center, expensive cars in the parking lot. The fates of people like Richard were decided here. And today his fate would be decided. "Miller, come in, you're expected," said the secretary, leading me into the office. Sitting at the desk was Thomas himself, a man of about 55, with a stony face. His eyes scanned me in 2 seconds. His lawyer sat next to him with a laptop. "Sit down. Show me what you have," Grant said briefly. I opened the flash drive. Reports, contracts, correspondence. I explained every transaction, every signature, every letter. As I read Angela's message to Richard, the lawyer stopped me. "Can I say it again? This is a direct conspiracy. This is a crime." Thomas was silent. He listened intently, occasionally looking at the files on his laptop screen. When I finished, the room fell dead silent. Finally, Grant looked up. "This is more than I expected. Brian, I appreciate it. What now?" "We'll start immediately. Today, he'll be removed from the company. We'll freeze the accounts. And, most likely, we'll turn the case over to the police." I could barely contain my triumph. I kept my cool, but inside I was celebrating. "And also," Thomas added, "if you want to get back into business, I don't forget the people who helped me." "Thank you. I'll think about it." I left the office, taking a deep breath. This was my day. I had dealt a blow that they would never recover from. When I got home, I put my phone down on the table and just sat there staring at the ceiling. I imagined Richard walking into his office right now and seeing Grant and his lawyers there, his face turning pale. Angela getting a call and hearing that their accounts had been frozen. I picked up my phone and opened her Instagram page. Silence. No new photos. I smiled. I knew that somewhere out there, behind the expensive walls of their mansions, panic had begun. That evening I called John. "What do you hear?" "Brian, they're in shock. Richard's like crazy. He's been kicked out of the office. They say his accounts have been frozen. Grant's lawyers are already working. Angela, she called in tears, asking what to do, but she's being tested too." I kept quiet. I was pleased to hear those words. They thought they had won. But today I showed them who the real winner was. Late that night, I got a message. It was her. "Brian, did you do this?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Should I answer or not? But then I just hung up. Let her suffer. This is just a beginning. I woke up to a call. The screen flashed a number I knew better than anyone else. Angela. I used to answer these calls with joy, with love. Today, with the calmness of a predator who has waited for his prey to weaken, I pressed answer, but I was silent. "Brian, please don't hang up." Her voice trembled. I was silent. I know you did all this." "So what?" I said coldly. "Please, I didn't know it would turn out like this. Richard, he left me. He packed up and ran away. All the accounts are blocked. I have nothing." I heard her sob. The irony. Now she was where I had been a few months ago. Abandoned. Without money. Without support. "Brian, I made a mistake. A huge one. I was stupid. Yes, I was. I'm sorry. I love you." I almost laughed. Love? From the one who wrote to her lover that I was an idiot they had finished off. "Do you love me?" "Yes. I was blinded." He promised. "I thought it was all for us, but he was just using me." "How did you use me?" No, Brian. I want it back. Maybe we can start over?" I was shaking with rage, but I kept my cool. "You ruined my life." "I know, but I'm ready to do anything. Please." I stayed on the street. "Do you need my money, Angelo?" No. You just... I realized what I lost. Too late. I hung up. She called 3 more times. I didn't answer. Then I found out the details. Richard had indeed run away. He had transferred the rest of his personal money to an offshore account and disappeared. He had left Angela with debts. The police had already started an investigation. She was also facing court because her name had been in the schemes. She was at the bottom of a broken trough. No friends. Everyone had turned away. No money. Everything was frozen. No support. Her love had fled, leaving her alone. That evening I sat in my small room. I stared at the ceiling again, but this time with peace. I did it. I got my name back. I destroyed them, just as they had destroyed me. And the next day I received a message from Thomas Grant. "Brian, I want to meet. I have an interesting offer for you." I knew this was the beginning of my new life. A life in which there would be no room for those who betrayed me. The next morning I arrived at Thomas Grant's office. The same one where a few months ago I had been a nobody. Just a man trying to incriminate his enemy. Today I went there as an equal. I was shown into his office. Thomas was sitting at his massive desk, examining me carefully. "Sit down, Brian. Thank you. You helped me in time. We destroyed Richard. He is awaiting trial. But I appreciate more than that. I can see that you are a man who knows how to fight. I want you to work with me." I almost jumped. This was an opportunity to return. Not just return, to break out to an even higher level. I offer you to become the head of a new project. Salary, interest, complete freedom of action. It is a great honor for me, Thomas. I want you to help me raise this business. And also, he paused. "I know your ex-wife is in on this too. She's on the edge now. If you want to finish her offer good, I won't object." His eyes were as cold as steel. This was business. And he knew I wasn't just here for work. I was here for the final revenge. "I'll do whatever it takes," I replied. I left the office with the contract in my hands. I came back, but the best was yet to come. That same evening, I received another text from Angela. "Brian, please. I know you're back on the job. Help me. I'll do anything." I stared at this text for a long time. Before, I'd dreamed of her begging me. Now it was a reality. I typed her. "Tomorrow, at 10 a.m., in a cafe by the park. Thank you, Brian. I'll come." She thought this was a chance, but this was her last trap. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe by the park, half an hour before the meeting. I sat in the far corner, so I could see the entrance. Everything inside was the same as before. The same smell of coffee, the same wooden tables where Angela and I had once laughed, planned trips, discussed the future. But today I wasn't sitting here for memories. Today I was waiting to see her broken. At 9:55 she walked in. I barely recognized her. Previously well-groomed, confident, in designer clothes. Now she was pale, with puffy eyes, a cheap jacket, her hair carelessly pulled back into a ponytail. She looked like someone with nothing left to lose. She noticed me and rushed to the table. "Brian?" I didn't get up. I didn't even reach out. I just nodded at the chair. You look great," she said, trying to smile, but it looked pathetic. "You don't?" I replied coldly. She faded. I could see her lips trembling. She used to be a queen who despised me. Now she sat before me like a beggar. "Brian, I know I hurt you. I was a fool. I was influenced." "Influenced?" "Yes, Richard. He planned it all. I thought it would be a new life, but he just used me. He ran away, and I was left with nothing." "I know." She fell silent, her eyes filled with tears. But it didn't affect me anymore. I didn't care. I want it back. I'm ready to work. I can help you. I just want to be there." "Why?" "Because I love you." I smiled. It was a lie. I knew it, and she knew I knew. But she was desperate. "I don't need help, Angelo. I've already paid it all back. I work with Thomas Grant." "I know. I was told. And what do you want from me?" "Brian, I have nowhere to live. I'm in debt. I'm just asking, at least temporarily. I have nowhere to sleep. And you thought I was going to save you?" "Yes. I'll do anything. Like when you wrote to Richard that I was an idiot." She looked up sharply. Her face twisted. She realized that I knew everything. "Brian, there is no I, and there is no more us. You betrayed me. You stole everything. You trampled me while I was lying down. I'm sorry. I don't give a damn. Please." "No." I stood up. "Brian, at least some money for the night?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out $20, and threw them on the table. "Buy yourself a burger." I turned and left. I could feel her gaze on my back. It was full of hatred, despair, shame. But I didn't care. I won. After that meeting, I walked through the city, and for the first time in a long time felt truly at peace. But I knew it wasn't the end. The final blow was yet to come. I had to put an end to it, and I knew how to do it. A few days later, I met with Thomas Grant in his office. We discussed the details of my new project. I was officially on the staff. Everything was going the way I wanted. And at the end of the meeting, Thomas suddenly asked, "Brian, what about that house?" "Still under arrest, but I want to take it. If you need help with the lawyers, let me know." "Thank you. I can handle it." The house. Our house. The one where we started, where I invested everything, money, love, work. Angela had left it when Richard ran away. Now it stood empty, under the bank's mortgage. And I wanted it back. Not for her, for myself, to close the circle. I called a lawyer Thomas had recommended. We quickly worked out the details with the bank. My newfound income allowed me to buy the property before it went to auction. 3 weeks later, I had the documents in my hands. I owned the house again, but now without Angela. I arrived there late at night. I opened the door. The walls were bare. The bare parquet. The mark from the couch where we had watched movies. The stain in the kitchen from the wine we had spilled on our anniversary. But this was a different house. I no longer saw love here. I saw my victory. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls. It was a symbol of my fall, and now a symbol of my return. I took my phone out of my pocket. I found Angela's contact. I hadn't called her since that day in the cafe, but now I decided to write. The house is mine again. I hope the benches in the park are comfortable. There was no answer, but I knew she had read it. That was the end. I had closed this chapter of my life. The next morning I stood on the balcony of my house, drinking coffee and looking out at the city. It was the dawn of a new life. I had not only gotten my business and money back, I had gotten myself back. Stronger, wiser, someone who would never be betrayed again. It had been a few weeks since I finally got my house back. Life was slowly falling into place. I was working for Thomas's company, immersed in a new project. Talking to influential people I could only imagine being around. I was no longer the Brian who carried boxes to the warehouse or begged friends for help. Angela no longer wrote. I heard that she had lived with a friend for a while, and then rented a small apartment on the outskirts. Richard never showed up. He was put on the wanted list. Angela was also called in for questioning, but it seemed that she had gotten out of the way, although she was left with a lot of debt. I no longer cared about her. For the first time in months, I felt free. I stopped visiting her social media pages. I didn't care. She no longer existed in my world. I was standing on the terrace of my house, the same one where I had once dreamed of a happy life with Angela. I breathed in the fresh air and realized that this was my place now. Not ours. Mine. This story broke me, but then it made me stronger. I had lost everything, but I learned to stand even when it seemed like there was nothing left. I had become what I should have become a long time ago, a person who would never allow himself to be weak again. My phone rang. It was Thomas. Brian, we signed the deal. Congratulations, this is a big step. Thank you, Thomas. And also, I think you're ready for more. We want to offer you a share of the company. I smiled. I knew this was just a beginning. My new life was just beginning. I hung up the phone, finished my coffee, and looked up at the sky. I went through hell, but I came out of it victorious. A month passed. My life was taking off. I was already working as a partner in Thomas's company. The deal we had made had brought us several million in profit. I had received my share. For the first time in a long time, I felt serious money in my hands. My own money. Clean, without deception, without theft. Money that I had earned not for anyone else, but for myself. I was redecorating the house. I had gotten rid of everything that reminded me of Angela. New furniture, a new kitchen, a new office. But I had left one thing behind. The note she had left when she left. This is business. I hung it in a frame in my office, so that I would never forget how I had been betrayed, and so that I would never let anyone do that to me again. And then, on Friday evening, as I was returning home from my meeting with Thomas, I saw her. Angela was standing outside my house, devastated, exhausted. Her eyes were red. Her hair was dirty. Her clothes were worn. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once loved. Brian, I've been waiting for you. I didn't answer. I opened the door, stepped into the yard. She followed. I know you hate me. I know I don't deserve it, but I can't do it anymore. What do you want, Angelo? I have nothing. I've lost everything. I just want a little bit of normality. I'm not asking for much. Maybe you can at least find me a job. I'm up for anything. A job? Yes. I'll clean, whatever. Just help, please. I looked into her eyes. I saw emptiness there. This wasn't the Angela who had laughed proudly on the yacht. This was a woman who had fallen to the bottom, and now she was pleading with the one she had thrown there herself. I took $20 out of my pocket, just like last time, for a burger, and I closed the door on her. I could hear her crying softly on the porch, but I didn't feel anything anymore. I thought I had already closed the story, but fate decided otherwise. A week later, I received an anonymous message. Your old friend is back. He's looking for you. Be careful. I immediately understood. It was Richard. He was back. He must have known that it was I who gave him to Thomas. And like a rat that escaped, he returned when his underground money ran out. I wasn't scared. On the contrary, I was waiting for this meeting. I saw him in a bar on the outskirts of the city. Fat, swollen, wearing a cheap shirt. His eyes were darting. He was nervously sipping whiskey. I went over and sat down next to him. He shuddered. "Hello, Richard." "Brian?" His voice trembled. "Didn't expect to see me?" I just wanted to talk." "What?" "The money's gone." "Brian, listen. I understand what I did. I was a fool. I want to start over. How do you propose to do this?" "Thomas, maybe you'll put in a word for him for me? I'm ready to work. I've changed." I laughed. "Are you serious?" "I just want a chance. Like the chance you gave me when you robbed me and left with my wife." Richard lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry. It's too late." I stood up. "We'll never cross paths again. If you try anything again, I'll personally see to it that you're put in jail." I walked away, leaving him to drink cheap whiskey. He was no one anymore. After that meeting, I was done. I went home, went into my new office, sat down in a chair, and looked at that frame. This is business. I picked it up and threw it in the trash. It wasn't about business anymore. It was about me. I was no longer living in the past. I wasn't holding on to revenge. I was simply becoming who I was meant to be, a strong, free man. I took a sip of whiskey, opened my laptop to work on a new project. But this time with a smile. I knew no one would break me again. The end. Please subscribe to our channel Stellar Stories. We have new amazing stories coming out every day. Thank you.